All right, so in this lesson, we're going to look at the ideas of nationalism in the 19th century. So, when we talk about nationalism as a concept, it can really be divided into two different elements or parts. The first part is national identity. This is the concept that assumes that humans are naturally divided into distinct groups that have distinct identities. And, you think about what it means to be an American, right? What is Americanism? And if you think about that for a second, you might think, okay, what makes us American? What makes us, different than France? You might say, oh, well, our Constitution, right? Our economic system, our education. It could be nationalistic things, our flag, right? The red, white, and blue, America. Our right to own guns, right? That's a big one. But it also could be, things that are very uniquely to us. Baseball, being the American pastime for so long. And now, we have football, college basketball, college sports in general is a very American thing. And these are all things that play into our national identity. You might get into food, hamburgers and French fries, apple pie, all different kinds of things that you look at and say, those are American, right? And so, while it may be different in different parts of the United States, there are definitely common elements of our culture and different ways that national identity can be built. Common language is a big one that, is not as quite as important in the United States because we don't have a national language, correct? There is no, all of our founding documents are in English. All of our representatives, for the most part, primarily speak English in our government. But that doesn't mean that we have a national language. But in Europe, however, national language is a big thing. In fact, in France, there's a government office that is basically in charge of protecting the French language. They want to make sure that there's not foreign words and phrases that are creeping into the French language, unlike the English language, where we are continually adding words and changing definitions, and we have Urban Dictionary. In France, while you may have slang, the official, dictionaries and stuff like that, they try and limit what goes in that because they want to preserve that because they say, this is what makes us French. You could say all the slang and all the change of words and stuff is really what makes us American in a lot of ways. The fact that we change what a word means every 5 or 6 years. And so this is one of the things that creates a national identity. And so, you think about German culture, they celebrate something called Oktoberfest, where they get together and they celebrate the harvest and they drink a lot of beer and stuff. And so there's all these different things throughout Europe that come together and they celebrate their national identity, something that makes them special and unique. And so, we focus a lot on American exceptionalism and stuff like this, but we've definitely come up short in, our time as a country of, being exceptional. Ask the Native Americans or anybody that was enslaved in the South in the early 1800s, right? And so sometimes national identity can become part of a very heavy and loaded political debate, but we definitely use it as a way to build a common history that binds us together. The second part of nationalism, and it's really the part that we're going to focus on for the majority of the lesson, is the idea of political self-determination, which is a fancy political word for saying that people have the right to rule themselves, not be ruled as a colony or anything like that. That people that feel like they share a national identity should then be able to rule themselves as a nation, okay? And oftentimes you see this happening in parts of the world that have national identities but aren't nations. Think, has anybody in here ever been to Canada? You have? Where'd you go in Canada? Toronto. Okay. You didn't go to Quebec? Okay, so apparently I haven't been to Quebec either, but in Quebec, it's still very French. In fact, it's kind of like being in a second Canada if you go there compared to a lot of the other big cities there, because they are still very, very, very heavily influenced by French ideology. Now, Quebec doesn't want to be its own country, but they definitely have their own kind of identity, cultural identity. How about the Palestinians, right? They have a national identity and they want to have self-determination, right? That's kind of a hot topic. You can make your arguments, and millions probably have died over making those arguments, and I have no interest in getting into the political debate of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But that's one of those ideas that the Palestinians see themselves as not having political self-determination. And they have nationalism, they have a national identity, and they want to be self-determined. And so you kind of have to understand that those are the two parts that really play into nationalism. Now, during the revolution of 1848, we see countries like Germany and Italy attempting to unify. They have national identity more or less. The Germans have a stronger identity than the Italians do. But both areas try to unify politically. They want to have the right to rule themselves. And we're going to focus mostly on the case of Germany because they're obviously going to be the biggest players in the next 100 years of world history there in terms of the impact that their strive for nationalism is going to have. So in 1848, a group of German nationalists meet in the city of Frankfurt for a meeting that's known as the Frankfurt Parliament. And at this meeting, the German nationalists write a document called the Declaration of the Fundamental Rights of the German People. And in it, they outline all the natural rights that Germans should have if they come together in a unified country. Because at this point, we have Prussia, and we have all these other smaller German states like Bavaria and Saxony, and they're all independent of each other. And so the purpose of this parliament is to try to bring in all these delegates from all these German states and bring them together to try and start moving toward self-determination and national unification. Okay? And so they begin by creating this Declaration of Rights. Now, we've been discussing the idea of liberalism, right? And this attempt to unify Germany under the principles of liberalism is really going to take the forefront of what they're trying to do. And obviously fundamental natural rights, and you see all this liberalism emerging. But what the parliament tries to do next is they draft a constitution for a united Germany. And under the terms of this new constitution for united Germany, they want to have a hereditary emperor, and they want to have a legislature that is elected by universal male suffrage. So kind of like a constitutional monarchy. They want to have a monarch, an emperor, who is passed down, because it's another part of nationalism. And what these people were used to having is you have all these German states, and they say, if we all have one guy that we can pledge our allegiance to, one guy up at the top of this thing, then it gives us all a unifying person, right? But we don't want to give away the ideas of liberalism, so we want to do kind of like what America does, even though we don't have a hereditary, we have an elected president. We don't want to go full constitutionalism, republic, but we want to have these liberalism ideas. They want to give all right the men to vote for delegates for the legislature. They want to create a constitutional monarchy. But in order for this plan to work, they need to have the German people unify behind it. And so they need to find someone who's going to become the emperor. So naturally, they're going to try and find the strongest German ruler that they can. And that happens to be a guy named Frederick William IV of Prussia. And they go to him with this plan to become the emperor of the united German nation. And he's probably interested in the power that he's going to get from being emperor. But there's one problem with the plan. Frederick William IV is not someone who is a fan of liberalism. He's like, I'll be your emperor, but I want to be absolutist. Well, that's not really going to work, right? He really despises the plan because of the constitutional and liberal aspects of it. And so since they can't get Frederick William to throw his support behind the plan, the attempt to unify really kind of falls apart and fails. And Germany's not going to be able to unify at this point in 1848. Italy also is going to try and unify, but we won't go into all the details of their attempt. But we'll kind of skip to the end and say, guess what? They also fail in terms of being able to unify. However, the Italians would actually finally be able to manage a successful unification by the time we get to the 1860s. While Germany is unsuccessful at unifying in 1848, a couple decades later it's going to be more successful. The individual who's going to spearhead the next unification movement is a man named Otto von Bismarck. And you can see an image of him here on the side. He is the prime minister for William I of Prussia because Frederick William IV dies and his son takes over. And so Otto von Bismarck is his prime minister. And now Otto von Bismarck follows a political philosophy known as Realpolitik. And it literally translates to the politics of reality. In other words, it's a very pragmatic political philosophy. He's not interested in theories. He is interested in the practicalness of how do you actually accomplish things. And he's going to kind of take the end justifies the means strategy. Do y'all remember who kind of coined the ends justify the means? Yes, Machiavelli. Very good. And so for him, that ends up going and leading to the unification for Germany. He gives a big speech. He discusses his plans to unify in Germany. And in it, he talks about how the revolution of 1848 failed because they tried to go down the path of liberalism in order to unify. And they ended up just standing around and talking and making speeches. But for Bismarck, he's kind of a conservative. He takes a different route. He says if we're going to be successfully unified, we have to do it through iron and blood. And it's called the Iron and Blood speech. And basically, we're going to have to unify through warfare. That this whole idea of liberalism, they're not going to let that happen. The concert of Europe is going to try and prevent, liberal revolutions. We've seen them fail because of lack of support from outside. If we want to unify, we're just going to have to do it. And so they do. One of the first major wars that Bismarck is going to fight is against the Austrian Empire in what's known as the Austrian-Prussian War of 1866. He basically tricks Austria into declaring war, which is kind of funny because then he can act like he's not the aggressor, right? If you can trick the person that you want to fight into hitting you first, then you can knock them out and say self-defense, right? That's like trying to goad somebody into hitting you. And you've seen people hit me. What you don't realize is like that's still you being the aggressor. If you're telling them to hit you, then you've basically given consent. You're not defending yourself anymore. But he does trick them. The Germans and the Austrians had captured some territory known as Schleswig and Holstein, and they had gone in together to fight against Denmark to take this territory away from the Kingdom of Denmark. But then Bismarck uses the problems of administering this territory to kind of make Austria so mad at Prussia that it declares war against them. And because the Prussian military is one of the best trained militaries in Europe at the time, the Prussians are able to just crush the Austrian army, and then they're able to unite the northern part of Germany behind them. He creates the North German Confederation, and all the territory that's here in red. So he unifies all of this territory together. And all of these people come together because they're like, oh, Austria is attacking us. We got to stand together. They defeat Austria. And Bismarck says, well, we do such a good job working together. We should just, team up, and stick this out together. And he's able to unify them. But notice there's this territory down here in yellow. In the southern part that's going to remain independent. So the next thing he's going to do is try and focus on getting the southern German states to also unify with him. So again, Bismarck is going to turn to warfare to unify the country of Germany. This time around, it's the Franco-Prussian War. In 1870, he's going to use basically the exact same strategy again, this time against France. He meets with Napoleon III. They kind of get into this controversy over who's going to be the next king of Spain. Napoleon wants to put a French member of the royal family on the throne. Bismarck says, no, we're going to put a member of the German royal family on the throne. And after they have this meeting, they can't come to any agreements on what to do. Bismarck publishes an account of the meeting, very highly edited. So basically, it's like he recorded their phone call and then edited out the parts that don't meet his needs or his desires, and then publishes it. Well, obviously, France is going to have to go back and be like, no, that's not what was said. And it's going to make him mad because the way he does this, he makes France look really stupid. Like a bunch of idiots, really. And so Napoleon III gets very upset. He declares war on Prussia. And once again, Bismarck is able to use that and say, hey, they're attacking us. We didn't do anything. You read the transcript. It was the perfect transcript. Literally nothing was said that was wrong. He's just attacking us for no reason, right? And so the southern and western states say, hey, that France is right on our border. Yeah, we're going to help you. And they come and unite against the French. And so he's very, very effective at being this kind of political manipulator. Very, very effective leader. The French army, again, is no match for the Prussian army. They're able to capture Napoleon III, which actually ends up bringing an end to the Second French Empire, and ushers in the Third French Republic. Now, again, now it's 1870, and France is once again changing their government. For those of you keeping track, it's been a lot, okay? And so France, remember, they are currently in the Fifth French Republic, so we got a couple more to go. The French are not happy with Napoleon, and they agreed to kick him out of power. And you kind of look at the political cartoon over here on the right here, and it's Bismarck, and he had, the Kaiser, the King of Germany and Prussia riding Napoleon, and Napoleon is depicted as a pig. And it's never good if you're a person being depicted as an animal, right? And it kind of sort of shows the French disgust with Napoleon and how easy it was for the German army to defeat them and march directly into Paris. So the Germans are forcing the French to sign the Treaty of Frankfurt. They're going to make them sign this treaty at the Palace of Versailles in the Hall of Mirrors, which kind of, is just kind of a sticking the knife in them a little bit more, twisting the knife to some extent. That's not my hair. And so once again, they're able to pull it together, and it's a very humiliating treaty for the French. It's going to create a very lasting conflict between them and the Germans, which is eventually going to, lead to World War I and World War II. But now you can basically officially call it Germany and be historically accurate. Although they may not have gone by Germany, they were the United German States. And so the Constitution that Bismarck is going to end up creating for the newly united Germany is going to make Germany into an empire, and this empire is going to be known as the Second Reich. Okay, the empire is going to be focused on the principles of conservatism. Government power is going to remain in the hands of the elite, and Bismarck is going to forge alliances between elite members of society in what's known as the Iron and Rye Alliance. Iron is going to stand for the rich industrial capitalists in Germany, whereas the Rye is going to stand for the land aristocracy, all the people that own the land and the agriculture. So Bismarck is bringing together these two power bases, the money and the high class, and pulling them together. Both of them are elite, so they're going to be the ones controlling all the powerful parts of the government. The German parliament, which is known as the Reichstag, is going to place power firmly in the hands of the upper house. The upper house is going to be rich industrialists and all the elites in society. The lower house, which has always typically been the middle class and lower class people, they're going to be really just there to rubber stamp things. And so under the principles of liberalism, Bismarck succeeds at unifying Germany, but he does it under the principles of conservatism instead. However, Bismarck is smart enough to know that in his new empire, you can see, the imperial logos in the picture here. He knows the empire needs to have support of the working class as well. Even though he doesn't want to give them any power, he needs to do something to make sure they're going to go along with the creation of this conservative government. Because if they don't go along with it, it's just going to fall apart and fail anyways. So what he does is he implements a couple of reforms to get the working classes to come on board. One of these reforms is the creation of a Social Security kind of idea, where it's going to give pensions to retired workers. Basically, when you get into your 60s, you're going to be able to retire and collect a pension from the government. Bismarck's really crafty here, though, because he sets the retirement age in the 60s, because most people don't live much farther beyond their 60s at this point. And so basically, most people are going to end up dying before they ever get to retirement age. And so he's going to be able to collect a lot of this money and not ever really have to pay out a whole bunch. The system remains solvent even today. It's still in existence the way it's been changed significantly, obviously, but still in existence today. And we borrowed their idea and kind of created our own Social Security system. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. By the time I get to retirement age, you're going to have to work until you're like 70, 75. You'll never retire. I mean, who knows? France is currently going through a really big fight right now because their president, Emmanuel Macron, just did an executive order essentially to raise their retirement age from 62 to 64, and people are losing their minds. Like, they're like burning stuff down. Like, they're pissed. People are like, the whole country's on strike. They're like, how dare you make us work 2 more years? This is ridiculous. The French are all about this like revolution thing and fighting, and they don't care at all. I don't know how they get anything done. He implements factory legislation to improve working conditions. And, he really wants the working class to see, hey, I'm doing a conservative version of this government, but we're working for you. Well, that's great. What happens when the next guy doesn't, though, right? That's always what happens, isn't it? And so he doesn't want anybody to try and take his power. This is an interesting map that kind of looks at, at the end of the Franco-Prussian War. It imagines, Europe as different nations and characters. It kind of gives us a sense of international relations. So things to notice is Germany and France right here in the middle. Notice how they're kind of fighting with each other. That's referring to the front, the Western Front for the Franco-Prussian War and stuff. You also have Russia over here. You see Russia, and they're kind of on the edges of being in Europe, but they're very interested in what's going on in Europe. And you have the Austrians who have kind of fallen down. Remember, the Germans defeated them. And you have the Ottoman Empire, who's represented kind of in 2 different ways down here, the Ottoman Empire. You kind of have a hookah girl, like whatever this is, I don't know what she's doing. It's kind of weird. It's a weird map, really. You have Spain kind of oppressing the Portuguese over here, and then draw your attention up here to Britain. And they kind of, you have the Queen here with her pet Ireland on a leash. Yeah. This is pretty indicting of what's going on in Europe at the time. And so nationalism, national identity, and political self-determination, the right to rule yourself. So in the case of the Irish, they certainly have Irish national identity. We're recording this on St. Patrick's Day, right? Which is a big, celebrate Irish holiday, right? And they have this huge Irish language, Irish culture. The Irish are Catholic. It unifies them together. The problem is that they don't have the right to vote. Ireland is part of Britain, and the Parliament has rule over them. And essentially, they don't want them to break away from Britain, and they don't want them to make their own decisions or domestic policies. Ireland wants to create an Irish Parliament that can deal with its own domestic affairs. But they're like, hey, we'll follow Britain's lead, and the British flatly reject Irish rule, home rule in the 19th century. And it's going to kind of eat away at these Irish nationalists. And eventually we're going to see demands for nationalism becoming rather violent as we get into the 1900s. And we see this desire for nationalism not being fully met as it does happen in Eastern Europe. The European powers at the Congress of Berlin, they decide, to deal with what's called the Eastern Question. And you have the Irish question, the Eastern question, the Jewish question, the woman question, right? All these ideas are means to say, like, these are controversial topics that we should discuss, right? And so at the Congress of Berlin, they decide whether or not Eastern European countries should be independent because the Ottoman Empire is becoming weak. A lot of those groups are trying to break away. And so like Greece and Armenia and Serbia, Romania, they're trying to break away. And they basically decide that they're going to allow some of them to and other ones not to. And it's this violence and this nationalism that is kind of unrequited to some extent that is eventually going to end up leading to World War I in a lot of ways. And then the last slide here, the historical significance of nationalism, the emphasis on self-rule, the ability to control your own destiny. It's going to affect the balance of power that had been established at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 to ensure peace in Europe. All these new countries are going to be united. Now they're going to want a say in the whole of Europe. They are certainly not going to be friends with each other, especially France and Germany. And they're going to have this major conflict between Britain and Germany as well. Germany really just makes everybody mad. They piss off Russia, France, England, pretty much everybody. It leads us into the major ideas like new imperialism and the problems that develop with nationalism. Like in Spain, for instance, we have the Basque region of Spain that speaks a different language. They speak Catalan, not Castilian Spanish. And they have a different cultural identity. They want to rule themselves. They still want to rule themselves, correct? The Basque region of France. They still kind of see themselves as different. In Russia, you have the Chechens who are trying to break away and form their own nation, but they're unable to do so. That's going to lead to some violence. And so we're really going to see these national rivalries develop and grow and build tension. And that's, again, going to come to a head by the time we get to 1914, within the next 40 years. So over the course of 40 years, it's just going to build and build and build and build and build. And that's going to bring us to an end to this module.